So Jeff, so state your name, please.
My name's Jeff Leverins.
And where are you from, Jeff?
I was born in Iowa and went to high school in Mount Vernon, Virginia.
So who's your dad?
My dad is Jack Leverins.
And what do you do?
Well, when I was about 2 years old, he became the county sheriff of Cedar County, Iowa, and he was the main sheriff of the whole county. He was the sheriff.
Cool.
And so he was, and he had a deputy, and our house was attached to a jailhouse built in the 1860s, and we were one of the last families ever to live in that house before it became a museum. It became a museum because it was one of the few standing house jails from that era.
Cool.
Yeah.
And who's your mother?
My mother's Grace Leverins.
And what does she do?
She was actually when we lived in the jail when I was 2 to 6. She actually was the one that fed the prisoners and kept the house organized and listened to the radio, police radio from my dad. And she took care of the family. And then when we moved from there, she became a deputy sheriff.
Cool.
Yeah.
And how's life in the jailhouse?
Well, I was pretty young, but the things that I do remember are the stories of like when the prisoner escaped. When I came home from school, my mom was all excited and running around crazy, and she threw me into the car with her girlfriend. It's like right after school, you know, in grade school, and threw me in the car, and we went and started looking for a prisoner that escaped from the jail. And so we actually saw him first before anybody else. My dad was out looking for him. I think he was even up in a plane during that time. I'm not sure. And we found him, saw him down the valley, and we were up on this hill, and we spotted him, and my mom ran into this house, just random house, and to use the phone, because we weren't in a squad car, we were in the family car. And she called my dad and said we saw him. And so we stayed up on the hill, and I remember being in the back seat of the car, and my mom and my sister and her friend were in the front car, front of the seats. And all of a sudden, you know, we saw my dad show up, and he ran down there with the guy that helped my dad was named Franny McQuillan, and he was an alcoholic that was in and out of our jail that we lived in, right? And he helped them, and they became friends. So he'd get drunk and end up in the jail, and you know, but he always was helping. That's how I learned to cuss, is from Franny, because my dad was always around him because he was like his helper, you know. So anyway, Franny was a lot faster than my dad, and he actually caught the prisoner that was escaped. And we watched it, and I'll never forget, you know, looking down in these pine trees down in this little valley in Iowa, and Franny McQuillan about 30 feet ahead of my dad, jumping on this guy's back and tacking him to the ground. So we watched that from up on the hill. Yeah. And
can you say that jail marked your life? Marked you for the rest of your life?
Oh, it affected the rest of my life for sure. Raised a lot of fears because I was so young about what life is, you know, about, like, because you don't formulate it. So there was a jail, prisoners, my mother fed the prisoners at a very young age. I would imagine that I created quite a story about what life is about.
All right. And your dad, I read that he escorted the president once. Is that correct?
Yeah, he escorted, it was an ex-president, Herbert Hoover, because Herbert Hoover was born in Iowa, and his house is there as a museum now. Herbert Hoover was there in Iowa, and President Truman was there, and I have a picture of them both, and Admiral Nimitz, a very famous admiral from the Second World War, and he was escorting them through a crowd of people, and I have a picture of my dad there with his big, sheriff hat, and his big hands, and he's like holding back the people with the two ex-presidents walking through.
Who in our family was in the World War II?
That would be Weston Melson.
And what did he do?
Well, he was a very good-looking man that signed up and went into the Air Force, and he was a co-pilot in a Marauder. I think it was a 2-engine bomber, and I think it carried about 7 people. And I never met him. It was before I was born, but it was my mother's. It was my mother's, favorite person in the world.
Cool.
And he was killed he flew out of France, and he was on a mission, and this was a famous group of planes, and the plane was named was Hell's Bell, and I have a picture of it online, and of all the bombs. What they did is they put how many missions they went on with bombs, and they would put the missions like 9 missions with 1 bomb across, which would make 10 missions, and there was like this big on the side of the plane. Well, this plane had this many missions during World War II, and this was I think 1945, right before the end of the war. And he left France, and his plane was shot down over Germany, and 1 person survived. The records were kept really well from Germany. That's how you could go online and get this information. Mm-hmm. Anyway, he was shot down over there and killed in 1945.
Right. And whoever family was in the American Revolution?
My grandmother was a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution, and her name was Clara Maud Neighbor, and she married William Neighbor, which is my grandfather, and before she was a Neighbor, she was a Melson, and the Melsons go back about 6 generations to the American Revolution, where the 2 names that the husband and the wife that fought, they both actually, the wife fought in the American Revolution too, alongside. Her name was his name was James Alexander, and her name was Mary Pedden, P-E-D-E-N. And they were both from immigrants from Ireland, and they came in I believe the 1760s, right before the American Revolution, into South Carolina, and they came. There were a lot of yellow fever back then. They brought a lot of relatives, but a lot of them died, but they survived, and they were in South Carolina, and they actually fought in several of the conflicts in the American Revolution as on the Confederate side, and there's a lot of information about that family. Depends, and they were actually their religion was being looked on, so they came to America as, you know, a new way of, you know, having their religion not be persecuted, and that's why they were here. And they came from Antrim, Ireland, and from Northern Ireland. That's where they're from, and they started a community in South Carolina that is still there today. And they're buried there in that town. Yeah.
And where does Leverance, last name Leverance come from?
Leverance comes from Germany, and the farthest I've got back was to Maria Leverance, and she was born in a town in Germany, right near Bodin, B-O-D-D-I-N, and her actually the last name, from what I know, was Leverance, had a T in before the Z, and she came over. I have the boat that she came over with. She came over with her son. Her husband was dead, and came over, and they came through. Oh, I forget where they came through, but they ended up in Ohio and then up to Wisconsin over the course of a couple decades. From, I believe, New York. I think they did come through New York, and that was again. And that was not again. That was the 1860s that they came over from Germany, and they were yeah, that's where they came from.
And how about Filipowski?
Yeah, that was my dad's my dad's mother. My dad's which is the name Leverance. That was the German, Northern German side, and then my dad's mother came from, well,